Take it away.
Good morning. A story is only great if you know how to tell it. And today our speaker, Corey Rosen, is going to tell us how to tell it. Corey is a writer, actor, visual effects producer, and a storyteller based in San Francisco, California. He hosts the Moth, Story Slams, and Grand Slams, and has been featured on the Moth Radio Hour, Alice Radio, Sarah and Vinny Show, and K-Fog's The Finch Files podcast. Corey is a performer at Bats Improv, one of the world's foremost centers for improvisational theater. Corey got his start writing for Comedy Central and Jim Henson Productions and Lucasfilm's Animation, and he wrote the screenplays for films and theme park rides and attractions exhibited around the world. When he's not writing, Corey works as a visual effects artist and producer. He has credits on dozens of movies, including several Star Wars, Pirates of the Caribbean, and a Disney's A Christmas Carol. He is taught at the MFA animation program at Academy of Art University. His first book, A Story Well Told, tells us secrets to making ordinary stories extraordinary. I introduce Corey Rosen.
Thank you, Hugh Tuck. Thank you, Breakfast Clubbers. Thank you so much. It is great to be back. I don't know if any of you remember me. This is my second Breakfast Club, but the first was in person and it was several years ago. And it itself was memorable because as a storyteller, I am so delighted to be in the presence of this group because as we just saw for the last, 30, 40 minutes, this is clearly a group of master storytellers. I mean, every one of your introductions showed the natural skills that you all have, which is, it's great. It's great to be in the company of my people, storyteller people. So thank you for having me today and for getting together. Thank you for just doing this. I do have a book, as they mentioned. It's called Your Story Well Told. It's my first book. It's very exciting. I am going to put in the chat a link. If you want to check out my book, I would love it. And I think, even though you are master storytellers, we always have something to learn. There's always ways that we can hear from others, find out what we're doing, find out what other people are doing, look at ways that we can maybe do things a little differently, learn from the teachings of others. And just hearing the subjects that are coming up in the upcoming guest speakers, talking about growth and change mindsets, talking about connections, talking about giving great speeches and being relatable to your audience. These are, of course, all aspects that come through in our lives and in our work through our stories. I thought I would maybe start today by telling a story, a brief story. And since Hugh Tuck is here, and Hugh is my uncle by marriage, as well as my friend and my sponsor here at the Breakfast Club, I would tell a story involving Hugh. I'm sitting in Hugh Tuck's backyard. It's June 12th of this year. It is the middle of the pandemic that we're all in, though, as you may recall, it was a moment that it looked like the clouds had parted. This was as we're all vaccinated, there is no Delta variant, and the summer has begun with a bright and shiny light on all of us. And it's a particularly special moment for me because I am sitting beside my 13-year-old daughter, who is next to my wife, and it is the day of her bat mitzvah. Shana Tova for all of those who mentioned the Jewish New Year. And so we're sitting here on this beautiful day in Hugh Tuck's backyard because it is the only place that would take us. No venues would yet be open to having a ceremony like this. But here we are outside experiencing and preparing for this momentous moment. And my daughter leans over and says, "I'm throwing up." Without saying a word, my wife, my daughter, and I quietly stand up, walk outside to the driveway of Hugh's house, and hold her hair back as she throws up in the bushes. Hugh, I don't know if you actually know this. This actually happened in your driveway. As she is doing this, dressed in the finest outfit that we could get her into, let's face it, she's 13, which with my daughter's fashion aesthetic was an Argyle sweater vest and a pair of, let's call them dress shorts. Dress shorts, that's a thing now. And Argyle knee socks. Oh, and Converse All-Star high tops. We're holding her hair back as she is emptying the contents of her anxiety and nerve-filled belly. And up the driveway walks Django, her 13-year-old childhood friend from preschool, who makes eye contact with the heaving bat mitzvah girl, who looks right at him and without missing a breath says, "You saw nothing." And as we walk back in to this ceremony which commemorates her transformation from childhood to adulthood, from being a receiver to being a giver in her life, we all take this moment to realize that what she has just internalized and, let's face it, externalized is a feeling that we all share. This feeling that we've all been holding on to through this whole pandemic, this whole feeling of nerves and anxieties as we reemerge from our houses, from our seclusion, from our separation, and start to reemerge, that we ourselves are going to have to let those feelings out in some way or other. And as she is emerging from the anxiety of that, also the anxieties of what she's going to have to face in her life, we knew that this was a step in that process. And as she stood up moments later and read from the scrolls, from the Bible, and gave a teaching to all of us, we knew that we all had something to look forward to with her as part of our lives. Thank you. So that's a story of something that happened. Thank you. I see you, Mr. President. Thank you. That's something that happened to me in my life. And it's something that kind of reflects on the way that I see, as I see all of you and listen to your stories this morning, that I relate to, which is the concept that we are all storytellers. We're all telling stories all the time. It is the way that we connect and relate to each other. And when we do this, when we do, like I got to listen to so many of you do, when we relate our experiences, not just as something that happened, but as something that we learned from, something that we experienced, something that took us from point A to point B, something that actually had some change in our lives, whether it's a very small change or a very large change, signifies what a story really is. And it's a very small change that we can make in our mindsets, if you're not familiar with some of these concepts, to taking what happened, something that happened, and transforming it, that very small transformation from just telling us the anecdote to understanding what makes it a story. And so one of the several concepts that I explore in my book is different ways that we can do this. And it's not that there's one way, there's not one formula for telling a story, but there are a number of them. And one of them that I use quite often is called the story spine. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this. And this is one of my favorite examples of story structure, because it's the simplest way that I know to take something that happened and storify it, to take it from the beginning, which is what is normal in the world of this story, that once upon a time, this is how life is, or how life was, with an everyday statement of this is what the routine of my family, of my life, of my world is, until something changed, something happened. In the story that I just told, it was the moment that my daughter leans over and says, "I'm throwing up," right? Not I'm going to throw up, but I'm throwing up, which causes a chain reaction of incidents, right? Because of that, we did something. Because of that, something else. Because of that, I had some insight, some realization, until finally there is a moment of clarity, or a moment where we reemerge back into the world. And ever since then, the world is a little different, right? Maybe it's just microscopically different, but in your mindset, in your worldview, the world is different. And this is the difference between just saying, "Oh, my daughter puked at her bat mitzvah in Hugh's backyard." Sorry again, Hugh. I should have told you that earlier, but maybe we're just watering the roses. to a story, to what something that in my view, what stories are fundamentally for all of us is they're not just an interesting thing that happened in your life. In some way, stories are our way of communicating to other people, survival, right? How did we survive? How did I get through something that I went through, which maybe you can relate to? Maybe you've had a similar situation. Maybe you haven't. And maybe in some way, you're one day going to face this situation. It's my way of telling or showing you that if you're ever in this situation, this is how I got through it. And maybe that's some wisdom that you can choose to listen to or not as you move your way through your experience. One last thing that I want to share with you before I kind of open up the floor to some Q&A is a concept that kind of plays heavily into my life and makes its way into the book, which is that, as Hugh mentioned in my introduction, my life is kind of split between really between three things. I'm not going to talk as much about my special effects work, working on Star Wars movies and things like that, but between The Moth, which is a storytelling show that, as somebody put in the chat, you've been to, and thank you, Susan, that is a community of storytellers where basically anybody can come out and tell true 5-minute stories with no notes to an audience of people. And we have resumed live shows. So I will be hosting a live show for people in the Bay Area this Sunday night at the Freight and Salvage in Berkeley. The show starts at 7 o'clock or 7:30. And there's information at themoth.org. And so the Moth is truly an amazing place because these are people telling their true stories. And you will get, at the Freight and Salvage, you will get a cross-section from Cal Berkeley students to retirees to formerly incarcerated people from San Quentin. You will get the spectrum of human experience all organized around a theme or a topic. And the theme this week is going to be gatherings. But the other aspect of my life is improvisation, which is kind of the opposite of storytelling, of true storytelling. This idea that you get in front of a crowd of people and you don't have a script. You are making up what you are saying. And this, to me and to a lot of you, kind of represents a reality that we often face, which is the concept that we have our lives, we have our experiences, we have our prepared remarks, we have things, a story maybe that we are planning to say in front of our team, in front of our family, in front of our colleagues. But then something goes wrong or something unexpected happens, and we have to adapt and adjust in that moment. And how we do that, how we make those adjustments and adaptations is improvisation, is being present in the moment, is using what you have. As we say in the improv world, wanting what you have, not having what you want. Using what's right in front of you to your advantage, building on something that just happened, something obvious, a gaffe maybe that you said, and not being destroyed by, oh no, I didn't mean to say that, that came out all wrong, and letting yourself deflate, but rather using the context, using the wisdom of what actually happened, and building on that, and through that, creating connection, creating trust, and creating a real moment that everyone can experience as true and authentic in that moment, that will, to your audience or to your listener, whoever that is, whether it's your family, whether it's your children, whether it's a date sitting across the table or a customer, you don't come off like someone's trying to sell them something. You don't come off like somebody who is giving them a canned, prepared speech that you have given to every other customer of yours, but you have created a connection directly with that person. And so that's something that the book really goes into a lot of detail about, of how do we do that? How do we balance those two things of having our truth, having our story, having our prepared presentation, and being willing and open to throwing it out, to being here, to being real, and to being connected with the person that is right in front of us right now. The very last thing I'm going to do I have 5 more minutes or? Okay. The very last thing that I want to share is something that, that also comes from the same world, the improvisational world, which some of you, I'm certain are familiar with the concept. But what I like to do is I like to experience and kind of explore this concept in a slightly different way than maybe you've heard it before. And the concept in the improv world, it's sort of improv 101. Does anyone want to guess out loud or in the chat? What is the fundamental concept? Go ahead, Alan. Anyone?
It's not the and versus but, is it?
It's part of that. Yes. Thank you, Claudette. So it's a concept that we call yes and, right? And I'm sure many of you have heard this in some context or other. It is kind of a fundamental aspect of improvisation. But what I want to kind of look at with you guys, and I'm going to just share my screen again, is say, what are we actually doing? If we are talking not in a improv comedy sense, but in a scene, or not in a scene, in a conversation with someone, when we say yes to someone, what are we doing? What are we saying for them? And you can, for this, since I'm sharing my screen, I can't really see the chat. So you can go ahead and say them out loud. Like, what is it that we are doing when somebody says something to us and we just say yes? What is it that we are saying to them or doing to them?
We're validating them.
We are validating them. Exactly. What else?
Affirmation.
Affirmation. Beautiful. How do I get, I guess I have to one thing at a time here.
Acknowledgement.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Did I do that wrong? Acknowledgement.
I think you're making it a positive interaction this way.
Yes. Beautiful.
You
Well, let's
also
do one or
give-
two more. Go ahead.
Okay, you also give them permission to be who they are.
Ooh, nice. Great. One more. You're
You
saying
didn't write affirmation.
I didn't write affirmation. Thank you.
You agree with them.
You agree with them. Beautiful. I'm so glad you said that. Because when you say yes to someone's ideas, to someone's presence, to somebody's presentation, you are giving them permission to be who they are. You are validating them. You are just the very act of acknowledging their idea and affirming it, and it creates that positive interaction, and it creates a situation where we are proving to the person that we are listening to, just like you did to me by answering my question, and I am doing by reading back to you your answers. The idea that so many times when we are telling stories or having interactions, unfortunately, we are waiting our turn to talk, right? We are listening with half of our mind, and we're waiting with the other half and remembering the thought that we had so that we can share our thought. So when we get into a yes and mindset with our daily interactions, conversations, and especially with our storytelling, or maybe when we're giving feedback to somebody else, when we begin with yes, when we begin with validating what they already said, giving them permission, acknowledging their idea before telling them what we think, then that person is going to be much more open and receptive to what is happening. And I'm really glad that someone said agree with them, because of all of these, this is actually the one that I disagree with. And this is why. I believe that you can still say yes to someone even if you don't agree with them. So yes, saying yes means that you agree with them often, but I think that it's not a requirement. You can still say yes to someone even if you disagree with them. Does anyone want to challenge me on that, or tell me why they think that that could or could not be true? How
Well,
might you, go ahead.
Since I said agree with them, let me continue. You agree with the concept that they are talking about, but you don't necessarily agree with everything that they are saying. You have your own opinion as a part of the conversation, not necessarily what the guy said.
Beautiful, beautiful, Hetty. So exactly what you said. I love that, which is that by saying yes, you can say, I agree with the concept, but maybe not the way that you said it. Or I can find something, some piece or some part of what you said that I can acknowledge, I can validate, I can go along with, I can have a positive interaction, even if, as I loved, who was saying, I was taking notes. Was it Alan? Alan, about how diverse this group is, how diverse our communities, our country, our world is, that we can still find ways that even if we disagree, we can validate an idea, we can validate something that we connect with about them, so that we can still have positive interactions with people, even if we are different and our politics or our life situations are different. So agreeing with them could mean that you agree with everything that they say, but it also could mean that you are going along with, for the sake of the conversation or the interaction, their ideas, that you are listening and you are receptive to them. So then, go ahead.
You can, my name's Eldon. You can do the sandwich theory. You can tell them what they like about what they said, or what you can agree with. Maybe show ideas on how you can improve on what they did. You know, without telling a person that they're wrong, you can say, well, you know, this is how I think we can improve the situation, or improve. You want, and then end up on a generally good note. You don't want to just alienate. You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, thank you, Calvin. I love that idea, and of course, I've heard that a lot before. This idea of sandwiching the I really like this, and here's what I want you to change, and then a compliment. You know, sort of sandwiching compliments around the delta, the thing that you would like them to change. I have a slightly different take and perspective on this, and part of this comes from the improvisation world. Part of this comes from the writing world. As a writer for movies, for animated movies, a lot of movies are written in committees, basically. Like there's this idea known as a writer's room, which is a table where all of the writers are sitting together. It's not individuals off at their desks writing and then coming together. It is written by committee. And for any of you who's been part of a committee before, you know that that can be a frustrating exercise, right? It's very difficult to get a group of people to all agree together. So this concept can work like that, sort of like the sandwich idea, in a slightly different way. If you think about it as a yes and way of take the idea, take the thought that someone shares, and instead of cramming, kind of cramming an idea in or fixing the idea, say yes and, like, find something that you do like about their idea. What is one piece of it? Maybe you hate the idea, but you like that there was a frog in it, right? Maybe you didn't like my story, but you liked the moment that the boy walked up the driveway and made eye contact with my daughter. Maybe you liked that scene. You could start with that. Like, I really liked that scene. I liked that moment in the story. I didn't care for the other part, and I didn't understand the bat mitzvahness, and I couldn't really visualize the backyard. You didn't, instead of saying all the things you didn't like, identify the part that you do like, and then let's move on to what and is. When you say and, what are you doing? Let's play the same exercise with 3 or 4 redefinitions. What are you doing when you say and to someone's idea?
Inject your own ideas.
Inject your own ideas. Great. Another one.
Changing the subject.
Changing subject, right?
It could lead you into giving a story that's similar but different and makes your point.
Yes. You can suggest it's like a similar or a different idea to make your point. Exactly. How about one more?
Share the thought about, I appreciate you sharing your thoughts with me. And
Yes.
not confronting it or just listening.
Yeah, Yes.
Correcting them.
Correcting.
Correcting.
You embellish.
Embellishing. Let's do that. Embellish. Yes. Beautiful, beautiful. So here we go. So I am the sensitive idea haver, and I share my story with a community of people. And instead of being told like, oh, here's how to fix it, here's all the problems with your story, here's all the things that I want you to fix. When we blow up our balloons of our ideas and people, well-meaning people, tell us all the things that are wrong with our ideas, what does that do to us psychologically, right? It deflates us. It makes us feel like, oh, this was a terrible, I should never have shared that. That was such a bad, oh yeah, you know what? I'm going to start all over. That was bad, right? But when we do this kind of model of giving feedback to our employees or to ourselves when we are crafting a story or an idea or a speech, which is that we start with what is working. We start with the yes. We validate the positive ideas in it, the things that are working, and then we inject additional ideas. We build on it, we direct it, we embellish it, we find parallel ideas that we could build on, and we collect ideas. Then the activity and the action of crafting and building and working together becomes much stronger and much more cohesive. So the last piece of this system that I'm teaching you guys today is the flip side of, if we're talking about, say, in the context of giving feedback. So you give your colleague or your employee feedback in this way. That's great. You feel great. I've shared this idea. I've really yes-anded them. I've told them what to do. But the flip side of this is how we receive feedback, right? Because most of the time, this is how people receive feedback. No, 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 no. Right? We generally, when someone is telling us what they think of our ideas, we block them out. We don't want to hear their ideas because who are they to tell us what they think of our idea, of our subject, or of our take on theirs? I worked hard on that. I don't care about you. So my model that I'm going to teach you today for how to receive feedback in this model is based on Aikido. By show of hands, anybody understand? Or yes, there's several practitioners or students of Aikido, which is using the energy of the person who is giving us that feedback. So that means that we have to resist defending. No, don't build the castle wall around us and just wait for them to stop sharing the ideas, right? Because if we do that, if we block people out and we wait for them to stop talking, then guess what? You're going to win, right? You're not going to get any of the feedback that people said, and you're going to be left with your own, like, so what should I do? I have no idea. Even if people are giving you good yes and feedback, you're going to be blocking them out. Secondly, the thing to try not to do is to contend. They say, hey, I think you should try this. Yes, and this. And you're like, I tried that. I don't like that. That's a stupid idea. And fighting them on all of their ideas, because what's going to happen if you tell us that our ideas are bad?
We'll stop sharing ideas.
Yeah, you will win, right? You will win. We're going to say, fine, I will not give you my great ideas. So the Aikido way is to blend, right? Is to have your ideas and to keep an open mind when people are sharing, whether they're sandwiching the feedback between, or criticism between feedback, or just saying, you could do this, you could do this, you could do this, because everybody else's feedback and ideas are just their opinions, just their ideas. And if ultimately you are empowered, or you want to empower your team by saying, I want to give you feedback and I want you to feel empowered to use the ideas or use the feedback in your own craft, then the whole team will build together, will trust each other better, and will work towards a better conclusion. So that's about all the time that I have today to share just a couple of the ideas that I go over in my book. That might not have sounded like a lot of storytelling wisdom, but trust me, it connects. And before we conclude, because I know that a lot of the people have places to go, Craig, do we have time to do some questions, or do we need to wrap it up?
Oh, no, actually, the Q&A is great. And what a wonderful presentation, Corey.
Thank you.
I took copious notes So,
Great.
yeah, and I can hardly wait to get your book. So thank you.
Fabulous, fabulous. I will also put in the chat, I do, of course, have my website, which has information about, coaching, consulting, classes that I teach. I teach storytelling classes that help people kind of go through the whole process of taking an idea into a story at CoreyRosen.com.
Corey, the URL you sent for the book, I got a 404 error when it tried to find that.
For real?
Yeah.
Oh, I put the wrong, I'm sorry. It's Your Story Well Told. I'll repaste that one. Sorry. Thank you for that. I left off the T at the end. Oops. Told. All right. Could you try that one and just let me know if that works? Thank you for letting me know.
Corey, I have a question.
Yes, Rick.
Most of the people that I consider to be accomplished storytellers have cite some mentor in their probably early life that demonstrated how to tell a story. And so who is that person in your life?
Great. So I have two people that are that in my life. There's one on the professional side, like a, sort of my guru of storytelling, whose name is Robert McKee. He wrote a book called Story, which is primarily about screenwriting, but, and that was kind of my first craft was screenwriting, but the overall concepts in McKee's book are applicable to all kinds of storytelling. One of my favorites is that the story should never be about what the story is about. In other words, the subtext is what the story is. I told a story about my daughter puking, but that story wasn't about my daughter puking. What was that story about, Rick?
It was about her quick reaction when her friend walked up the driveway.
Right. She showed something about herself that I couldn't have taught her, right? She demonstrated a human response and a coping mechanism. She showed maturity in an uncomfortable situation that was the most mature thing that I'd ever seen her do. So that story was about something I couldn't teach her. I created a day to celebrate her and family gathering and all that, but she did the work. That story was about her, not about me, right? The story is never about what the story is about. The second person who influenced me in my life was my 5th grade teacher, Mr. Genthner. And one of the great joys for me as a first-time author is that I'm getting to do book tours and events. And so I went home to my hometown of Rochester, New York this summer, and I did an in-person gathering. And I reached out to Mr. Genthner, my 5th grade teacher, who I have not spoken to in more than 30 years. In fact, when I'm in the car with my mother driving around the pouring rain in Rochester, and I said, I want to invite Mr. Genthner to my talk, she said, Google Genthner obit, right? And I was delighted to find he was not dead. In fact, he was very alive. And I went to his house and got the great joy and pleasure of finding my mentor, the teacher who really inspired me, by basically doing all the things that I'm teaching here, by finding the light, by finding what is working in his students and encouraging that. Not teaching by correcting the errors, but teaching by finding what is working and watering what I call the healthy part of the plant. Don't prune the dead parts of the bush or the idea, but water what is living and watch that flower and turn into the beautiful thing that it will become. So by finding and truly having the joy of not only going to his house and signing a book for my teacher, but then having him come to my presentation at the JCC in Rochester, and I got to tell a story about him in front of 100 people, was one of the highlights of my year, was getting to do that. So thank you, Rick, for the question.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation, Corey.
Thank you. Fripp.
Well, hello. Sorry,
Hello.
I missed part of it. I do believe I probably made the sale, and I will watch the whole thing. But being a graduate of many McKee courses, I think Story 3 times, and I have the CDs, I quote him, stories are the creative conversion of life itself.
Yes.
Into a more powerful, clearer, more meaningful experience.
100%.
And an audience of 1 or 1,000 would rather hear a simple story well told than a brilliant story badly told. And
Exactly.
talking about your wonderful teacher, Susan Rowan, who's on this call, was a teacher very much like that. So that's wonderful. Congratulations. And I have to watch the whole presentation, but I would ask you, what is your next step to do with your book and your teaching that would be, if you came back 2 years from now and talked to you, said, well, you remember 2 years ago, I told you I would go, I plan to what would that?
Yes. Thank you. What a perfect setup question, Fripp. It's as if I paid you to say that, which I did not. Full disclosure, did not. But I am writing the follow-up book right now, which is the next step of this process. So this book is about constructing story, about going from finding the idea for the story, crafting it, and then telling it in whatever form. The next book is situational storytelling, kinds of stories that we have to tell in our lives, whether it's a roast, whether it's a toast, whether it's an acceptance speech, whether it's bad news for your employees or good news for your employees. So it is situations that we find ourselves in and ways that we can storify that, ways that we can tell a story, because what stories do is they make abstract things concrete. They make fuzzy concepts universally understandable, that we can relate to those ideas. When people today during introductions were telling their 9/11 stories, we were all right there with you, because we all have a 9/11 story. We all relate and remember where we were, what happened, how our lives changed. When I heard some of your jokes, the Will Rogers story, the Bill Buchanan, your private eye. I mean, just there were moments that are so story worthy that we can find ways to cut through. And so my follow-up book, when I come back in 2 years, it will be about that. There will be situations that require eulogies, moments in our lives that we all probably will find ourselves in, like, I'm going to have to tell a story there. And it's going to be, it's tips and advice for that by me and other interviews and professionals that I'm talking with on the subject.
I believe Anastasia had a question earlier.
Anastasia?
Yeah, actually, I didn't raise my hand, but I do have a question. I was about to. You must be psychic, Craig. You know, I kind of want to just plant a seed for everybody here, because I love this idea of storytelling. I believe in, I'm a speaker's agent, so obviously I have a huge passion for speaking and storytelling. But I want to encourage people also to record their stories, because we all have these beautiful stories, and sometimes they don't get captured, and we don't know. None of us have a guarantee we're going to be here tomorrow. So one thing that we started doing during the pandemic, as many people did, is we started having Zoom calls with our family. And the last year of my mother's life, I recorded those Zoom calls, and we specifically asked her questions. And I had this whole list called Talk Story, where I'll toss out like, hey, why did you all have milkshakes after I went to bed? Because I was the baby of the family, kind of a thing. And then we get this whole dialogue going. And I have it all. I've captured it all. And I just want to encourage people to do that, because so many people are doing Zoom connections with family, but they're not capturing it.
Yeah.
And that's where we get the wisdom from our elders or our families and things like that. And then something I just started doing last week, even though my granddaughters, I moved to Corvallis to be close to them, and I spend the night half the time with them. I've just started recording myself telling them stories. Well, I'm reading stories right now, but eventually I'm going to do telling of stories too. But like, I read a bedtime story and I videotaped myself reading that story. You know, they listen to Insight Timer stories every night of their lives. Why not listen to their mommy telling it, right?
Beautiful,
So
beautiful.
I really love this. Last thing I want to say, that visual that you had about the storytelling makes me want to pay attention to everything in my life, like everything that happens. If I were to think, how would I tell this story? I feel like I'm going to get more depth out of that experience, because I'm paying attention to what my life means or feels now as a result of this one experience that I might have just let slip by. But now when I'm focusing on, this is a story, what makes this real? What can I learn from it? Where can I take this? Just powerful. I feel like my eyes are going to be different in how I see the world going forward. So thank you for the beautiful presentation. Just loved it.
Thank you so much. And can I suggest to you and to you all a game that you can play with your grandchildren or your children or your families that is a storytelling game. So there's no pressure. It's not like you have to craft the story, but it's a thing that you can do that actually helps us to break out of telling the same stories. Because there's a problem I think that a lot of us have, which is that we tell the same, and even to our grandchildren, well, did I ever tell you about the time that I met your grandfather? Like, there's that old chestnut, right? And maybe they've heard it 40 times. So there's a game that you can play, which actually kind of lights up, like the way I visualize it in my brain. It's like there's a spotlight searching through your brain. If you ever see the Pixar movie Inside Out, where there's all these little glowing balls in your deep memory that lights those up and makes you remember things. And the game is called Portkey, which is named for an object in the Harry Potter books. If anyone's read any of those or familiar with that, which is basically a magical object that you touch this object and whoosh, it takes you to another time and place. And so what happens is that you give somebody, not like physically give them, but you tell them an object, any object, pencil, notepad, grand piano. You just say a thing and they say, okay, grand piano takes me to, and some memory, not a whole story necessarily, but some memory. Oh, I remember the time, like if I said this to my father, he would probably tell the story about the time that his mother in Brooklyn used to go on game shows. And whenever, like, they didn't have a lot of money, so whenever he wanted something, she knew that there's all these game shows that are taping all over town. She could go on a game show and maybe she could win. So she won him a piano because my dad wanted to learn to play the piano. So she would dress him up in like a ridiculous mismatched suit as a little kid, and he would get picked and they would go on and she won him a piano. And that was how they got their piano. So then that person would take some object from their story, like a child's suit, and give that to another person. And then that would trigger for them, okay, child suit takes me to a memory. And so by playing this kind of ricochet storytelling game based on an object, because objects are visual containers that actually help to connect us to our own memories. So if we just try to think of a story, it's like telling someone, just tell me a joke. And a lot of people, I mean, not this crowd, I know you guys, but a lot of people are like, oh, I don't know any jokes. But then you start to tell them a joke and what do? They can tell you the punchline. Right? Oh, I know this one, right? Stories are the same. If you say like, hey, tell me a story, people are like, I don't know. You say, tell me a story about a piano. Like, oh, I've got a great story about a piano. So that's a game, an exercise that you can do with your kids or grandkids that can kind of light up other kinds of stories and then get them telling you stories too. So they're not just, stummas.
That's brilliant. I love it. We will definitely do that. We also have that game, that little dice thing.
I love that. Story
You
cubes.
just roll that with all the kids and we'll sit around and you just peg off each other to tell this story. And that is so much fun.
A great idea. I see one more hand. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I see Patricia's hands up and I think we're running out of time. So Patricia, why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Well, if somebody else has a question, I had one, I would defer it.
I see.
Well, I was just going to quickly ask Corey, I see your guitar. Do you know my brother, Robert Fripp of King Crimson?
I'm sure I do. Wow. Does he want to jam?
He just got back to England Monday from a tour, so I think he wants to rest and reconnect with his wife.
Wonderful. Well, thank him for his decades of beautiful music. Thank you. Bill Buchanan, do we have time for a quickie?
Yeah, go ahead, okay. Bill, you go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I usually am a man of few words. Usually try to be. Anyway, great presentation. I can always tell, when a speaker is connecting with me, because I'm kind of like a guitar in your background, you're striking a chord. Well, I belong to a Christian organization that goes back to the Crusades, and our focus is on helping veterans get reassimilated, And my approach is to my events coordinator. I said, look, We want to get these veterans out in the wilderness. We want to challenge them out there where there are no distractions like texts and all that sort of thing, Instagram. And the idea is to get them out there. And my approach is, let's get them talking about their experiences, especially the ones who are PTSD victims. We're still working on the concept with the Marin Veterans Council, but it's going to happen. I think next year we'll have them, saddle up the horses. We'll go out to a wilderness area and spend a week. But here's my question for you. How do you what's the best strategy for getting somebody to tell their story when they're locked up and they don't want to tell?
That's a great question. One might be an exercise like I did before. There is this, there's another game or way of doing it that it's in the book that's called, that reminds me of the time, right? And if you essentially gamify it, is how I would say it, is like, let's play a game. I'm going to give you a word and just say like, that reminds me of the time something. So not like, tell me the hardest day of your life. Tell me about the accident that ruined you. No, here's Legos. I've got Legos. That reminds me of that time I stepped on a Lego and I like, damn it, and I yelled and hopped around the room, right? And then they give you a word, or you just say like, okay, well, that reminds me, stepping on something reminds me of the time that I blew my leg off in Nam. No, I'm just kidding. That's a horrible relation to your story. But you know what I'm saying? It's like that reminds me of is a game where basically it's how conversation works, right? This is what we do all the time, is that somebody says something that reminds me of. So similar to Portkey, by just playing it as a game, instead of saying, talk to me, tell me your story, it's really something else that I draw from the world of improv theater is if we make it a game, let's play a game where we're going to do it this way, then it tends to open people up because there's nothing at stake. They're not in therapy. They're not being held to their words. They don't have to give a prepared presentation. They're just remembering something, and then you're going back and forth and doing that. And the more people talk, the more people feel comfortable talking.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, with that,
Greg?
Corey, thank you. Betty?
May
Go
I
ahead.
just make one quick comment in response to Bill and Corey's comments? Rich and I just saw the movie The Railway Man on Sunday, and it's about World War II and the GIs that were captured by the Japanese after the fall of Shanghai. It's a documentary. It's a true story. And they weren't American GIs, excuse me. They were Brits. And it was an amazing story. I couldn't watch part of it. I had to cover up my eyes, but the point of it at the end was just so heartwarming about forgiveness and so forth. And I recommend that book. And he had PTSD, as did all of the gentlemen. And it was very sad and eye-opening. So I do recommend the book, and I won't tell you how he ended up opening up, because that's part of the story. But
So that's a book, or that's a
the
or
book,
a
the
movie?
documentary, excuse me, documentary movie, my mistake.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, with that, we need to end. It's 8:54. Corey, thank you so much.
Thank you all
for your message today. I mean, what a great presentation, and
thank you.
It just shows. I mean, we had numbers the whole time, people sticking around. So that shows you've been well received here. I'd also like to take an opportunity to mention next week we have Meredith Bell, who's going to be discussing create a coaching culture with training programs that stick. And then following that, we have our own Karen Cortell-Reisman, who's going to be talking about the Einstein letters. So we'll look forward to that, Karen. And with that, I am going to end the recording, and you guys can stick around here for a few more minutes if you'd like to ask any other questions. I have one for you, Corey. So I'll go ahead and end the recording now.
Also,